Elizabeth Kim, a 68-year-old retired executive from Boston, spent 30 years believing home ownership represented financial success and security. She diligently paid her mortgage, maintained her property, and took pride in her ownership. Then, an unexpected series of medical issues required her to relocate closer to specialized care. She discovered her home would take months to sell, required expensive repairs before listing, and would incur significant transaction costs. While waiting for her home to sell, she rented an apartment near her medical providers and experienced an unexpected revelation. For the first time in decades, I felt truly free. When the furnace broke, I called the landlord. When property taxes increased, it wasn't my problem. I had liquidity, flexibility, and peace of mind I never experienced as a homeowner. Have you ever questioned the deeply ingrained belief that homeownership represents the pinnacle of financial success, especially in retirement? Could it be that what we've accepted as financial wisdom might actually be constraining your options, limiting your flexibility, and potentially weakening your strategic position in your later years? Today we are exploring a revolutionary perspective on the rent versus own decision for those over 50, one based not on conventional financial platitudes, but on the strategic principles of power, control, and security, first articulated by Renaissance political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli. While most financial discussions focus narrowly on equity building and tax advantages, the strategic approach examines something far more valuable. Which option gives you greater control over your destiny as you navigate the unique challenges of your later decades? The conversation around housing after 50 typically centers on financial calculations while ignoring critical strategic considerations. The standard advice, always buy, never rent, might have served previous generations well, but fails to account for the dramatically different circumstances faced by today as seniors, including increased longevity, rising healthcare costs, geographic mobility of family members, and the changing nature of retirement itself. Consider the first fundamental principle in making this decision. What Machiavellian strategists would recognize as strategic adaptability in changing circumstances. Home ownership creates significant friction when adaptation becomes necessary, whether due to health changes, family needs, or financial shifts. This friction comes in many forms: emotional attachment to property, time required to sell, transaction costs, and the unpredictable housing market. Richard Taylor, a retired professor from Portland, experienced this firsthand when his wife was diagnosed with a condition requiring a single-story living arrangement. Our two-story home suddenly became an obstacle rather than an asset. We needed to move quickly, but it took 9 months to sell our home in a declining market. The stress affected both our finances and my wife's health. Looking back, renting would have given us the flexibility to adapt immediately to our new reality. The second core principle involves what Renaissance strategists understood as the importance of maintaining freedom of action. Contrary to popular belief, home ownership often constrains options rather than expanding them. Your capital becomes illiquid, tied to a specific location and property. Your financial obligations become fixed through mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Your attention and resources must remain committed to property upkeep, regardless of whether other priorities emerge. Thomas Anderson from Phoenix implemented this principle by selling his home at 62 and strategically renting instead. I realized my home was controlling my decisions rather than the other way around. By renting, I've maintained complete flexibility to relocate based on my evolving needs, kept my capital liquid and diversified, and eliminated the constant demands of home ownership. This approach has given me more control, not less. The third essential principle for housing decisions after 50 is what Machiavelli would recognize as the priority of security over other interests. While conventional wisdom treats home ownership as the secure option, strategic thinking requires examining security more comprehensively. True security comes from maintaining options, preserving liquidity, and retaining the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, areas where renting often provides advantages. Barbara Nelson, a retired accountant from Tampa, applied this principle in her housing decision. After analyzing all aspects of security, financial, physical, and emotional, I chose to rent. My assets remain diversified rather than concentrated in a single property. I can relocate quickly if neighborhood conditions change, and I do not face the unpredictable costs of major home repairs. This arrangement provides more genuine security than ownership would. By applying these strategic principles to your housing decision, you can move beyond the simplistic, always buy mentality to develop an approach that truly serves your circumstances, priorities, and long-term security. In our next section, we'll explore practical protection strategies that translate these principles into specific actions, including techniques for evaluating housing options, protecting your assets while renting, and creating optimal arrangements whether you choose to rent or own. Having established the fundamental strategic principles for housing decisions after 50, let us explore specific protection strategies that translate these concepts into practical actions. These approaches will help you evaluate options, protect your assets, and create optimal living arrangements regardless of whether you ultimately choose to rent or own. The first protective strategy involves implementing what I call the true cost comparison, a comprehensive evaluation framework that goes far beyond the simplistic rent versus mortgage calculation. This expanded analysis includes all ownership costs, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, HOA fees, opportunity costs of illiquid capital, transaction costs for eventual sale, and the value of flexibility. This complete picture often reveals that renting is financially competitive with or superior to owning, contrary to conventional wisdom. James Wilson, a retired financial analyst from Denver, applied this approach when deciding whether to purchase a retirement condo. When I calculated all costs of ownership and factored in the opportunity cost of my down payment remaining invested, renting was actually 15% less expensive annually. This analysis completely reversed my initial assumption that buying was the obvious financial choice. The second protection strategy focuses on creating what Machiavellian strategists would recognize as position flexibility in your housing situation. For owners, this means selecting properties with broad appeal that could sell quickly if needed, avoiding highly personalized renovations, and maintaining an emergency fund sufficient to carry housing costs during an extended selling period. For renters, this means negotiating favorable lease terms, building strong landlord relationships, and researching multiple alternative properties. Susan Williams from Cleveland implemented this approach by specifically choosing a rental property managed by a responsive established company rather than an individual landlord, negotiating a 2-year lease with a clause allowing termination with 60 days notice for health reasons, and maintaining a list of 3 alternative properties that would meet her needs if relocation became necessary. The third practical strategy involves implementing asset protection through diversification, ensuring your wealth isn't too excessively concentrated in housing. For homeowners, this means limiting home equity to a reasonable percentage of your total assets. For renters, it means strategically investing the capital that would otherwise be tied up in a home. Both approaches protect against the risk of having too much of your financial security dependent on a single asset class or property. Margaret Baker, a retired teacher from Nashville, discovered the importance of this strategy after selling her home at 67. Instead of purchasing another property, I invested the proceeds across multiple asset classes. This diversification has generated income that covers most of my rent while maintaining liquidity and spreading risk. My financial security has actually increased compared to when I had most of my net worth tied up in my house. Your fourth protection strategy should include developing a location freedom plan that maximizes your ability to relocate based on evolving needs. Unlike younger adults whose location is often determined by career opportunities, seniors may need to relocate for healthcare access, family proximity, cost management, or climate preferences. This plan should include regular evaluation of whether your current location still serves your needs and research into alternative locations that might better support your changing priorities. William Chen from Raleigh implemented this approach after retirement. I created a decision matrix with weighted factors important to me: healthcare quality, cost of living, proximity to family, climate, and amenities. I review this annually to evaluate whether my current location still ranks highest. This systematic approach has led to one strategic relocation that significantly improved my quality of life while reducing expenses. The fifth protective strategy involves creating what strategic thinkers call leverage through negotiation, using your age, reliability, and financial stability as advantages in housing arrangements. For renters, this means highlighting your reliability to secure favorable terms. For owners considering selling, it means leveraging your flexibility on timing to negotiate better prices. Patricia Garcia, a retired business owner from Seattle, utilized this approach when renting after selling her home. I provided evidence of my perfect payment history, excellent credit, and financial stability to negotiate a below-market rent with no annual increases for a 3-year lease. My landlord valued the security of having a dependable, long-term tenant over maximizing short-term rental income. These practical protection strategies create a system that acknowledges the complex realities of housing decisions after 50, prioritizing flexibility, control, and comprehensive security over simplified financial calculations. By implementing these approaches, you maintain greater control over your housing situation while protecting against both market volatility and changing personal circumstances. In our next section, we'll explore strategies for managing housing-related relationships, including techniques for working effectively with landlords, property managers, real estate agents, and family members while maintaining your autonomy and protecting your interests. Having explored strategic principles and protection strategies for housing decisions after 50, let us now focus on effectively managing the relationships that impact your housing situation. This area is particularly important because housing decisions involve ongoing interactions with various stakeholders who can significantly affect your security and satisfaction. The first critical element in managing housing relationships is what Machiavelli would recognize as the balance between cordiality and authority. Whether dealing with landlords, property managers, contractors, or homeowners associations, maintaining this balance ensures you receive proper service without creating unnecessary friction. Unlike younger adults who might prioritize confrontation or avoidance, strategic seniors understand that relationship management directly impacts their housing security. Carol Martinez, a retired healthcare administrator from Minneapolis, applies this principle in her interactions with her property management company. I maintain friendly, respectful relationships with management staff, remembering birthdays and expressing appreciation for good service. However, I also document all maintenance requests in writing, know my lease terms thoroughly, and calmly stand firm when necessary. This balanced approach has resulted in exceptionally responsive service and favorable treatment. For homeowners dealing with service providers, implement the strategic principle of controlled information and competition. This involves obtaining multiple quotes for all significant work, limiting information about your urgency or budget, and strategically using competition to ensure fair treatment. Unlike younger homeowners who might lack experience with contractors, seniors can leverage their knowledge and patience to create advantageous arrangements. Robert Johnson from Detroit employs this approach with home maintenance providers. I never reveal my full budget for projects, always obtain 3 quotes minimum, and make it clear I am evaluating multiple options. This approach has consistently resulted in better pricing and higher quality work than my neighbors receive when they fail to create competitive situations. For seniors navigating family expectations around housing decisions, implement what strategic thinkers call preemptive framing of your choices. This involves proactively explaining your housing decisions in terms of strategic advantages, rather than defensively responding to criticism or concern. This approach shapes how family members perceive and respond to your housing choices. Linda Jackson, a retired executive from San Diego, used this technique when deciding to sell her family home and rent instead. Rather than announcing my decision and inviting debate, I carefully explained to my children how renting provided me greater security, flexibility, and peace of mind. I presented specific examples of how homeownership had limited my options and created stress, This proactive framing helped them understand and support my decision rather than questioning it. When dealing with real estate professionals, if you are reselling a home, utilize the Machiavellian technique of strategic patience combined with clear conditions. This means establishing your minimum acceptable terms, being prepared to wait for them, and selecting agents who understand your priorities, rather than pushing for quick transactions. David Martinez from Atlanta employed this approach when selling his longtime family home. I interviewed 5 agents, clearly communicated my minimum price and preferred timeline, and selected someone who understood I valued the right outcome over a quick sale. This patient approach ultimately resulted in a significantly better sale price than neighbors who accepted the first reasonable offer. For those considering retirement communities or age-restricted housing options, implement what Machiavelli would recognize as alliance building before commitment. Thus, this involves developing relationships within communities you reconsidering before making housing decisions, allowing you to evaluate the social environment, management quality, and resident satisfaction beyond what formal tours reveal. Joseph Rodriguez from Portland used this strategy when considering a retirement community. I attended public events, joined activities open to non-residents, and built relationships with current residents before deciding. This insider perspective revealed management problems hidden during official tours and ultimately led me to choose a different community that better matched my values and expectations. Remember that in all housing-related relationships, perception management remains crucial. How landlords, service providers, community managers, and others perceive you directly impacts your treatment and options. By demonstrating knowledge, preparation, and quiet confidence, you shape these perceptions to your advantage. Jennifer Lewis, a retired government employee from Cleveland, notes the impact of this approach. When I first relocated and rented after decades of home ownership, I made sure to present myself as a knowledgeable, stable tenant by bringing my organized financial records, references, and thoughtful questions to my first meeting with potential landlords. This preparation has consistently resulted in preferential treatment, including being offered properties before they re-advertised publicly. In our final section, I'll integrate these principles and strategies into a comprehensive system for housing decisions after 50, with specific emphasis on implementation timelines, evaluation frameworks, and adapting these approaches to your individual circumstances. We've explored strategic principles, protection strategies, and relationship management techniques for housing decisions after 50. Now, let AS integrate these elements into a comprehensive decision-making system that adapts Machiavellian wisdom to your specific circumstances and priorities. This integrated approach begins with what I call the strategic housing framework, a systematic process for evaluating the rent versus own decision based on power, control, and adaptability, rather than merely financial calculations. Unlike conventional models that prioritize equity building and tax advantages, this framework focuses on which option provides you greater security, flexibility, and peace of mind during your later decades. The first component involves implementing a 5-dimension housing evaluation system. This means assessing potential housing options across 5 critical dimensions: financial impact, comprehensive costs and benefits, health adaptability, suitability for potential health changes, location flexibility, ability to relocate if needs change, time-energy requirements, maintenance and management demands, and emotional well-being, stress level, and satisfaction. Unlike the traditional approach that prioritizes financial considerations, this balanced assessment ensures your housing decision serves all aspects of your life. Mary Patel, a retired educator from Phoenix, applied this evaluation system when deciding whether to keep her family home. When I scored my options across all 5 dimensions, I realized that while ownership slightly outperformed renting financially, renting dramatically outperformed ownership in the other 4 categories. This comprehensive analysis led me to sell my home and rent an apartment, a decision that has significantly improved my overall quality of life. When implementing this framework, develop what strategic thinkers call a decision timeline that removes emotional pressure and ensures thorough evaluation. This timeline should include periods for information gathering, option evaluation, preliminary decision-making, testing assumptions, and final implementation. This measured approach prevents rushed decisions based on conventional wisdom or emotional attachments. Kenneth Davis, a retired business owner from Austin, created a 6-month decision timeline after deciding to reconsider his housing situation. I dedicated specific weeks to researching options, visiting properties, analyzing costs, consulting with financial and legal advisors, and reviewing my conclusions. This systematic process led me to a housing decision that perfectly balanced my need for security with my desire for flexibility. As you implement this system, remember that strategic housing decisions require periodic re-evaluation rather than permanent commitments. Schedule annual reviews of your housing situation asking, does this arrangement still serve my evolving needs? Have my priorities changed? Have new options emerged that might better serve my circumstances? The contrast between conventional housing wisdom and strategic approaches represents fundamentally different philosophies. Conventional wisdom typically emphasizes ownership as the universally superior option, equity building as the primary goal, and permanence as the ideal. Strategic thinking recognizes that optimal decisions vary based on individual circumstances, prioritizes control and adaptability over equity accumulation, and values flexibility over permanence. This difference doesn't mean homeownership is always wrong for seniors. Rather, it means the decision deserves thoughtful, strategic consideration beyond simplistic financial calculations or cultural assumptions. The question becomes not, should I follow the standard advice to own, but given my specific circumstances, resources, and priorities, which housing arrangement gives me greater power over my future? By implementing these strategic principles, you create a housing approach that serves your actual circumstances rather than conforming to general expectations or outdated conventions. This realistic strategy provides something that following generic housing advice often fails to deliver: genuine control over one of life's most important domains. Helen Campbell, a retired professor from Nashville, summarizes the impact of this approach. For years I felt trapped by the conventional wisdom that selling my home would be a financial mistake. Applying these strategic principles helped me realize that what I was really sacrificing was my freedom, flexibility, and peace of mind. My decision to rent has given me control over my life in ways I never experienced as a homeowner, constrained by property demands and reduced liquidity. If you've found value in these insights, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing for more strategic wisdom adapted for senior decision-making. Share this information with friends and family who might benefit from this alternative perspective on housing choices. Together, we can build a community of strategically minded seniors who prioritize genuine security and control over conventional financial assumptions. Remember, the true measure of a wise housing decision isn't what's found in equity spreadsheets, but in the freedom, security, and peace of mind it provides during some of life's most important years.